Okay, still continuing with the same process, but I've got two more examples that I want to work for you. The difference being these are going to be to the fourth power, okay, where the ones I've just finished have been to the third power. Now you're still going to have to get the list of numbers just like what we've been doing, so you'll see very similar process. We're just going to have to add one little step onto it. So for P, constant term is 12. So if you list all your factors of 12, okay, and now Q is your leading term, which is just an understood 1. So that's going to make our list of P over Q real easy, because all I've got to do is put all of these numbers over 1, which will just give me that same list of numbers again, since all I have to do is put a 1 in the denominator. Okay, so a while ago when I got my list, I told you just go down the list until you find the first one in this list that's going to work, okay? So first of all, you would try positive 1, okay? But I'm going to tell you positive 1 is not going to give you the 0 that you need. So next on the list, you would try negative 1, okay? So if you substitute negative 1 into your polynomial, then you do get the 0, okay? So we've got to do our synthetic division. Okay, so let's set up the negative 1. So pulling my coefficients and my constant, I would have 1, 4, 7, 16, and 12. Okay, bring your 1 straight down. Negative 1 times 1 is negative 1. Add, you get 3. Negative 1 times 3 is negative 3. Add, you get 4. Negative 1 times 4 is negative 4. Add, you get 12. Negative 1 times 12 is negative 12. There's your remainder of 0. Okay? Now, the next step is where this problem's going to be different. Okay? Because this time we're starting out with a total of 4 roots that we're looking for. We've got to find another one in our list, okay? So what you can do is just start from where you left off a while ago. So like for instance, you've already tried the positive 1. We're not going to bother trying that again, okay? We've already got the negative 1. So the next one on the list that you should try would be positive 2. But again, I've already tested all of these to save some time. Positive 2 is not going to work. Then you would try negative 2. Negative 2 is not going to work. Positive 3 is not going to work. Now, negative 3 is going to work. So if you were to substitute negative 3 into your polynomial, then you will get the polynomial to equal 0, okay? So we're going to do synthetic division now with the negative 3. Now, what you've got to remember to do, though, is you're not going to go back to the original numbers when you're doing synthetic division the second time. You're going to take these numbers across the bottom, and those are going to be the ones that you're going to use across here. So transfer over your 1, 3, 4, and your 12. And see, there is the 0 that I had talked about getting, okay? Now, this started out as a 4th power, which means when I did synthetic division the first time, that got this down to a polynomial. These numbers represent a polynomial to the 3rd degree, okay? So now that I've used these numbers, now the numbers that I have down here represent a 2nd degree, and that's what you're needing to do. You're needing to get it down to a 2nd degree, because once you get it to a 2nd degree, you've got lots of options: factor, quadratic formula, taking square root of both sides, okay? So if this is a 2nd power, that means this is going to be 1x squared. Now, I don't have the next term, that's why I have a 0, so I want to skip the x to the 1st power, which means this one would be my constant. And see, this would be one that you could take square root of both sides. So you're going to subtract your 4. And now you're going to take square root of both sides. Now when you're taking square root of both sides, don't forget to put your plus minus, okay? So square root of 4 is going to give me 2. The square root of the negative is going to give me I. So my roots, or my zeros, whichever case they're referring to, that's going to be the -1. Of course, that came, figuring it out by substituting it in, but using the synthetic division. Then the -3, and then now the plus or minus 2i. So we've got 4 answers, because this was a 4th degree, okay? Now, one thing I want to mention to you, chances are you are all going to do the -1 first. If by chance, I do have some students, like instead of going positive, negative, they want to go all the way through and do all the positives and then come back and try all the negatives. If that's the case, you might not get these same 2 in the order that I did. Like for instance, you may have come across the -1 first, and then you would have done the -1 second, okay? Which is still going to give you the correct answer, okay? So you could have done this one first and done this one second, and that's perfectly okay. All right, let's look at one more. Okay, so getting our list of P over Q. So P is going to be -4. That's my constant term. So plus minus 1, plus minus 2, plus minus 4. Okay, Q is going to be positive 2. So that would be plus minus 1, plus minus 2. Okay, so P over Q. So 1 over 1, 2 over 1, and 4 over 1. And now I've got to put them over 2. So 1 over 2. Now, 2 over 2 reduces to 1 that you already have, so we're not going to write it down again. And then you put the 4 over the 2. 4 over 2 reduces to 2 that we already have. So this is going to be our list of numbers to choose from. Okay, and again, I've already kind of gone through and figured this out. So you would start, you'd try +1, -1, +2, -2. +4, -4. And actually, -4 is going to be the first one that you're going to get to work. If you were to plug -4 into your original polynomial, it will cause the polynomial to equal 0. Okay, so let's do synthetic division with the +4. Okay, so bring your 2 straight down. So 4 times 2 is 8. Add, you get 17. Okay, 4 times 17 is going to give us 68. Oop, I'm sorry, this is supposed to be -4. I thought those numbers aren't going to work out. All right, let's try this again. So make sure you go back and make this negative. So -4 times 2 is -8, which means that's just going to be a 1. Now, -4 times 1 is -4. Add, you get 1. -4 times 1 is -4. Add, you get -1. -4 times -1 is +4. There's your 0. Okay, now remember, you've got to get another one from this list. So we've made it all the way down to -4. So next thing on the list you need to try is going to be 1/2. Of course, as far as putting that in your calculator, it would make it a lot easier, like when you're plugging it in here, just to say 0.5, just make it a decimal. That'll make it easier to enter in your calculator. But the 1/2 is going to be the one that gives you equal 0. So now you're going to take these numbers, and you remember you're going to use those over here when you do synthetic division the second time. All right, so I'm going to have 1/2 out front, and then a 2, 1, 1, -1. Okay, if you do 1/2 times 2, you get 1. Add, you get 2. 1/2 times 2, you get 1. Add, you get 2. 1/2 times 2 is 1, add, so you get your 0, okay? So this was a third degree, which means this represents a second degree, okay? So I have 2x squared plus 2x plus 2. Now, you can factor a 2 out of this. It is a greatest common factor, but that's the only factoring that you can do. You're going to then have to do quadratic formula anyway, so let's just go ahead and go with the quadratic formula here. So that means that A is 2, B is 2, and C is 2, okay? Now, you still got the quadratic formula there in your notes that you can look back at. I wrote it down for you on the other example. Okay, so you're going to have negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 2 squared minus 4 times 2 times 2, all divided by 2 times 2. All right, so if you calculate what you have here under your radical, what you're going to end up with is negative 12. Okay, now we need to work on simplifying the square root of negative 12. You've got to separate the negative. Now you do have the perfect square of 4 that will go into 12. Of course, it goes 3 times. So the square root of the 4 gives me 2. The square root of the negative 1 gives me I. And then the 3 is going to be left underneath. Okay, one more step that I can do. There's some reducing because the 2's and the 4, of course, you can reduce those all by 2. So we have negative 1 plus or minus I square root 3 over 2. Okay, so what you have for your roots, sorry about that, or your zeros, you've got both numbers that you got from the synthetic division. That's the negative 4 and the 1/2. And now you have the negative 1 plus or minus I square root 3 over 2. There's your answers.